All right, looks like we're just past 1 o'clock, so we could go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for coming today. I know that it may not be heavy on your mind on drought, but hydrologic conditions are applicable all the time. So thank you for joining the December 2020 Kentucky Monthly Climate Perspectives on Drought and Hydrologic Conditions for Kentucky. I'm Megan Shargorodsky, and I'm with the Kentucky Mesonet and Kentucky Climate Center, and I'll be your moderator. We have Dr. Stuart Foster, who is the state climatologist and the director of the Kentucky Climate Center and Kentucky Mesonet, who will be running most of the webinar. And we have Matt Dixon from the UK Ag Weather Center, who will be providing some agricultural impacts. We generally will have a YouTube live stream, but for some reason, yet again, it's not working on my computer. So we will have to get that uploaded after the fact again, but hopefully that should be done later this afternoon. So with that, I will go ahead and turn over to Dr. Foster.
All right, thank you, Megan. I appreciate that, and welcome everyone here in December. We got this picture from our station in Clinton County there near Albany, and as I looked at it, it occurred to me that we might need to go into the Christmas card business. So our cameras certainly have captured some rather remarkable photos for us. Anyway, again, standard information you've seen before, but we have to recognize our friends with the National Integrated Drought Information System and the Midwest Drought Early Warning System that helped make this possible, as well as our collaboration with many partners here in the state. Our next webinar will be on the first Thursday in January, which is January 7th, 2021. I think most of us are looking forward to that 21 on the end here. And as Megan had provided some information there about being able to access this presentation later on. Again, another reminder about our Kentucky Drought and Hydrologic Impact Reporter that Chip Zimmer has worked diligently on to develop, so that if you don't have that, please download that. Okay, we'll be looking again at recent conditions, impacts. Have been a pretty quiet month all in all, but we have the opportunity to kind of summarize. Now we're finished with the growing season, so Matt will be able to give us some good details, kind of looking back over the year, and then we'll go ahead and look forward to what might be ahead here for the next month and winter season that's almost upon us. So on the left side, we've got a couple other photos from our stations, one in Shelby County and one in Clark County. And the reason I selected those, they both show, just a nice green, healthy looking landscape. But at the same time, as we will see going forward, we have been seeing a shift in our precipitation patterns now recently, especially over this past month. So there's some talk of dryness, but it's not really evident anywhere on the landscape yet. So with that, if we look at precipitation over the last 30 days, our radar estimates with the pixels on the image show totals that are in the 1 to 2 inch range over most of the state. Some smaller areas, portion of the of eastern Kentucky that had more than 3 inches, that was the maximum. And again, the blue shading areas that are between 1 and 2 inches, and you can see the mesonet totals superimposed there. So a relatively dry period. Sorry there, Megan. 60-day map. We add on another 30 days going back to most of October, and we see there along the Ohio River had some much higher totals, and so our 60-day totals are upwards of 8 to 10 inches, and that was again part of a swath of heavier precipitation that was experienced going back to October through the Ohio Valley there and to our neighbors to the north. But otherwise, much of the remainder of the state had totals that were a bit lower in the 5 to 6 inch range. All right, there we go. And the 90-day totals, again, we add a little bit to that, and we see there that the driest areas, again, are still in that kind of green shaded area through the central core of the state. So some totals there, 6 to 7, 8 inches over a 90-day period. And at the same time, we've got some higher totals to the east that are above 10, 12, 14 inches. And then again, along the Ohio River there, totals that are in the 9, 10, 11 inch range. So a little bit of variability across the state, but not really that much over the 90-day period. Now, if we look at that in the context of what's normal, so we have percent of normal, 30-day, 60-day, 90-day totals. And this is really driven, I think, by the 30-day total in the upper left, where the amounts in the orangish brown are anywhere from 25 to 50% of normal precipitation. And really the entire state, except for that small swath in eastern Kentucky in the green shading, everybody else was below normal precipitation, and in most cases below 75% of normal precipitation. So that stands out to us because it represents the first really dry month we've had all year. We've been running above normal precipitation wise since the flash drought occurred last year in September. The 60-day and 90-day totals, again, especially with the 90-day total, shows pretty widespread dryness, but not particularly extensive. I mean, we're looking at 75, 90 to near normal precipitation, and then some areas are just a little bit above that. So some dryness that we haven't been seeing that widespread, but at the same time, we're getting here we're in the cool season of the year, so it's not something that we're quite as concerned about at this point. So temperature wise, for November, we were above normal in terms of average high temperatures. And those ranged 2 to 3, as much as 4 degrees above normal across much of the state and the region. Whereas the low temperatures were much closer to normal, to maybe just a degree or so above normal. So all in all, a relatively warm fall period, late fall period. Soil moisture and groundwater levels remain satisfactory. There's less green and less blue on those maps than there has been over the past few months. So with the drier conditions, that shows up a little bit on the soil moisture rankings, but nonetheless, those levels are anywhere from normal to above normal across the state. And likewise, when we look at the shallow groundwater indicators, so just 2 different indicators that are really trying to get at the same thing. So, we don't have a single perfect measure of anything. So we'll try to come at it from different directions. And looking at soil moisture measurements from the Mesonet, again, this time I selected some different stations, have Trigg County in the upper left. So Trigg's down near the land between the lakes on the Tennessee border in western Kentucky. Clinton County on the southern border, kind of central part of the state. And those are areas that over the last 30 days had been in the drier parts of the state. What I would highlight there is that even though those areas have been dry, the soil moisture has been plentiful. There has not been a drawdown, given that we're late in the year. we're past their growing season and such. So I think a key point here at this time is that while precipitation says we're getting dry, the soil and landscape is not telling us that at this time. And again, I think it's very much a seasonal issue with that. Hardin County, we haven't shown Hardin County for a while, so we'll get up to Elizabethtown area. And again, very healthy levels in terms of soil moisture there. And Madison County is an area that has improved. That's an area that got a little bit more precipitation, but had been drier earlier this summer. It was one of the areas that, you know, we started to see a little dryness developing, but again, that's come back nicely. So again, just selected these out of stations across the state, but they pretty much represent a common theme that our soil moisture conditions are looking pretty good at this time. 7-day stream flow averages are, for the most part, in the normal range. We've got a few that are showing up now below normal, but for the most part, we're about where we would expect to be for this time of year. And when we branch out to the 28-day picture, really see the same thing. Basically, normal stream flows, a gauge here or there that may be a little bit below normal, but again, no major concerns one way or the other with stream flows at present. And as we might expect, there are no issues with flooding at the present time in Kentucky or in the surrounding areas. And again, when we look back at the precipitation maps, that pattern of dryness was extending beyond Kentucky's borders. U.S. Drought Monitor, then, if we put all this together, we're seeing a blank for Kentucky. But for looking at the country as a whole, we continue to see drought, including extreme and exceptional drought categories dominating in the southwestern United States, and drought now becoming very prevalent in the Great Plains and particularly the upper plains there too. Earlier we had drought in Iowa and extending into the Midwest. We still see some of that, but there has been some improvement, and drought kind of hanging on in parts of the New England states, an area that we don't tend to think about it too much. But if you look at Kentucky and the surrounding areas, we have a little bit of abnormally dry conditions to our south. It's possible that that may come up into Kentucky at some point. There was some discussion of whether, you know, that would be the appropriate classification at this point or not. But the general thought was that given that our soil moisture and vegetation greenness and such was there, that probably didn't warrant that at present, but that could change going forward. So 1 month change in terms of drought status. You can see that drought has been intensifying in more areas than it has been improving. So if we get down to Texas and the Southwest, where the drought has been more intense, it's continuing to intensify in those areas. And we're looking, kind of jumping ahead, but as we look at the outlook and the presence of La Nina, there's concern that that pattern could continue. We could see some continued intensification going forward. Otherwise, again, the dryness to our south in Tennessee has just developed recently. And I put this map in just for a comparison so we could step back and see where we are today versus where we were a year ago today. So there's a pretty big change. You know, we had gone, I must say, I didn't look it up to tell you exactly, but it had been a couple years, I'll say, where we had very, very little drought across the country, or basically at historically low extent of drought in the United States. But that period has been waning, and now we're seeing drought reappear in areas to our west. So In terms of moving on to impacts, it was again a pretty quiet month all in all. We had a couple days where there was some widespread weather and impacts. The first of those was November 15th, when we had strong winds not related to thunderstorms, and they produced some damage, knocked some trees down, some power poles, including in Campbell County, tree falling onto multiple houses and causing some injuries. I didn't have any more details about the nature of those injuries. And then otherwise, just several reports of the first accumulating snow of the season for many folks across the state. And again, no real impacts per se of that other than kind of documenting that event. So all in all, it was a pretty quiet month in November. So with that, Megan, I'll send it back to you and we'll go up the road to Lexington or Georgetown or wherever Matt is today.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, as he just mentioned, we will pass it on to Matt Dixon with the UK Ag Weather Center.
Thanks to Georgetown today, and the sun is out. I'm happy to see it. So just to start out, harvest 2020 is wrapping up now. The last weekly crop report from the USDA came out this past Monday, the last weekly report of the year. 91% of soybeans have been harvested. This is only slightly behind the 5-year average, so we'll be finishing up there soon. 84% of winter wheat has now emerged. Looking at pastures, the warm weather in early November really helped out. It provides some late fall pasture growth and let farmers preserve some of those hay reserves for the winter. I know we talked about the warmth in November, or you did, Stu, sorry. But I know there were 2 or 3 days when we had near or record-breaking high temperatures in the upper 70s to low 80s. Now, for this time of the year in November, this is about 20 degrees above normal. So really helped out those pastures. I know there was some concern with winter hay inventory in 2019 with the drought, but we're in much better shape this year. In a recent crop report, hay supplies were reported as mostly adequate. So with that said, I wanted to move into more of an overview of the 2020 season. I had a question from Stu last month about how yields and crop condition in 2020 compared to previous years. To start out, I used a tool from the USDA National Agricultural Statistics Service called QuickStats to access weekly crop condition over the past 5 seasons. I chose corn in this case, but for the most part, crop condition ran high across the board for most of 2020. In this graph, I focused on the percentage of corn each week rated in the good to excellent category, the top 2 categories for crop condition in the report. To make these lines relatable, I went by the week that the crop report was released, just to give you an idea of when these weeks fall at the bottom. Week 20 would be about the middle of May, week 30 last week in July, and week 40 would be the first week of October. So as you can see, 2020 is the light blue line, and it stayed mainly around 85% or more in the good to excellent category for most of the year. Something you definitely want to see if you're a farmer or producer across the state. Sure, we had some hiccups throughout the season, but of course that happens every year. I think the biggest difference is the intensity of these hiccups compared to previous years. We didn't see anything with very high intensity that would really be a detriment to our crops, with the exception of wheat, which I'll talk about in a second. But you can see the yellow line from 2019 when crop condition, the good to excellent categories went under 70%. Of course, this is just for corn. It did that towards the end of the year with the drought we had. Looking at the steep drop in July 2018, looking back earlier in that month, high heat and limited rainfall was a problem. That was pretty much the case in 2012, but more to a higher extent. Same thing from 2012 and 2018, many heat advisories and excessive heat warnings were issued. Heat indices topping out 110 degrees at times, which did lead to some corn pollination problems. I know by the first update of the U.S. Drought Monitor in August that year, moderate drought was also introduced to the purchase area. So it was dry, it was warm. So looking at the drop in early 2016, this was a result going in the other direction. It was very heavy rainfall, which led to flooding and replanting of cornfields across the state. So there was also some severe weather events that year, large hail and damaging winds. Overall, the state averaged about 6 inches of rain in May that year. But ultimately, 2020 ran pretty close to that line in 2017, which in 2017 was a record-breaking year for corn yields in Kentucky. If we can move to the next slide, please, we'll take a look at that. So yeah, thanks. In 2017, Kentucky corn averaged 175 bushels per acre, according to estimates from USDA NASS. This was a record at the time, but it looks like that will be surpassed in 2020. In this line graph, I used quick stats again and extracted the annual average state yields for corn, beans, and wheat going back to 2000. The 2020 numbers are the November estimates from USDA NASS from their November agricultural yield survey. Right now, they're forecasting record-breaking yields for both corn and beans in Kentucky. 181 bushels per acre for corn and 55 for beans. As they stated in their report, this was likely a result of favorable growing conditions throughout the year. We just saw that in the previous slide. This would be 12 bushels per acre more than 2019 for corn and 9 extra bushels for beans. So just looking at the graph for a moment, despite some of those problems in 2016, 2019, yields have been up in recent years. Obviously, though, you can see the big hit in corn yields in 2012 with that devastating drought and heat wave we saw that year. That year in 2012, we only averaged 68 bushels per acre, about a third of what we're seeing in 2020. So while the lines for corn and beans are moving in the right direction, the same cannot be said for wheat. As we talked about earlier in the growing season, winter wheat took a big hit with those late freeze events in the middle of April and early May. Overall, USDA NASS reported an estimate of 63 bushels per acre this year, which is a drop of 13 bushels from 2019. Looking at this graph, this was the worst year for wheat yield since 2012. Megan, if we can go to the next slide, please. Awesome. So lastly, I wanted to give everyone a real quick idea how Kentucky yields across the 3 major crops compared to the rest of the nation. These maps were also developed by USDA NASS and illustrate the 2020 grain yield and percent change from 2019. Other than Iowa and Tennessee, most across the Midwest saw better corn and bean yields in 2020 compared to last year. Of course, Iowa had that derecho that moved across the state, which caused significant damage. One other thing to look at is the states with a hashtag next to the yield, which shows a record yield for the year. In 2020, Kentucky wasn't the only one to see record yields. You can see Indiana, Wisconsin, Minnesota, South Dakota, and some of those southeastern states all saw record corn yields this year. Indiana was one of those states that also is forecast to see record bean yields. So looking at the bottom, wheat was more so split about 50-50, whether you saw decreased or increased yields. Kentucky and Tennessee were both in the same boat with damage from the late season cold spells. But once again, this was the worst year for wheat since 2012 here in Kentucky. So with that, that brings a wrap to the 2020 growing season. I know everyone wants to put 2020 in the rearview mirror for obvious reasons, but other than the late freeze events, I think Kentucky ag fared pretty well in 2020. So now on to 2021, and with that, I'll send it back to you guys.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks for some encouraging words here. That again, it's always good to see our farmers across the state doing well, because that means the communities in which they live are doing well also. So going forward then, 7-day quantitative precipitation forecast has still a storm system to kind of move across the eastern portion of the country, and that's leading to the expectation of up to about an inch, maybe a little bit more of precipitation across part of Kentucky, a little bit less to the northwest. But given that it's been relatively dry lately, we would look forward to that precipitation here over the next few days. And then the 6 to 10 day outlook. Basically, when we look at the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlooks, we're in a period of a bit of flux, and especially as we go to the 8 to 14 day, there's a little bit of uncertainty, maybe more so than usual. But for the 6 to 10 day composite period, we are expecting to be near normal in terms of temperature for Kentucky. And precipitation wise for Kentucky and most of the East, once we get that storm system and precipitation this week, we're less likely to see much precipitation going forward through that 6 to 10 day period. So we're expecting to dry out as we see a little bit of a ridging pattern developing in the East. But on the 8 to 14 day outlook, again, more uncertainty about the persistence of that pattern. And so we've got a lot of the country that is in the near normal category in terms of temperature wise for mid-December, and precipitation wise, again, for the most part, we're in the near normal category, slightly elevated chance of below normal precipitation in portions of Western Kentucky. But again, these signals and from the model discussion implied a good bit of uncertainty. So package that together then, and the outlook for December, the CPC comes out with their outlook on the third Thursday of the month. So I forget what date that was, but it may have been the 18th or so of November. And then sometimes they update that if things have changed notably, and they updated it here at the end of November to give us the outlook that we're seeing here. So for the month of December, all in all, anywhere from equal chances of above below normal temperature to a slightly enhanced chance of above normal temperature. And really kind of, as we're already starting to see, that average is going to reflect the outcome of a bit of a roller coaster in terms of some warm periods and cool periods for this December, as opposed to just a consistently warm or cool pattern. And precipitation then, again, for the month as a whole, for the second month in a row, then we would be anticipating an enhanced likelihood of below normal precipitation. And the thing that I would pay attention to there is that pattern extends through much of the U.S. to the west, which includes large areas that are experiencing some degree of drought at this point. So that forecast, looking at December, and then as we go forward, we've talked in the past couple months now about La Nina, and we're in a La Nina. I think I should change the word advisory. I think that needed to be edited out. But we have a 95% chance of La Nina continuing, not developing, but continuing through the winter. You can see the probabilities in the graph at the lower right remain very high for the November, December, January period and on through into the spring months. So typically El Nino or La Nina are stronger in the winter months and dissipate as we get in toward the summer months, although occasionally they persist for more than a year. Looking at this graphic that we saw, again, the last couple months, but it's providing some historical perspective of what La Nina or El Nino typically means for us here in Kentucky. We're looking at precipitation, and I'll point you to the upper left corner, the December, January, February season, or basically the winter season. you can see on the left side of that graph that the median line, that the brighter blue line, is notably higher than the median for a neutral or an El Nino condition. So that's basically telling us that on average, our winter season is wetter when we're in a La Nina. And you can see the range of values that we've experienced, including a couple winters where we were well above normal in terms of precipitation, near or above 20 inches of precipitation for those 3 months. You know, there were occasionally some very wet years that were neutral. When you get into a strong El Nino, you know, that just doesn't happen. But so what we're saying is that a La Nina kind of tips the balance or tips the scales a little bit to increase the likelihood of extremely wet conditions, in addition to the notion that just the average precipitation increases during the winter. But again, it's not a guarantee. As you can see on the by looking at the individual points and lines, there have been several winters where precipitation was not much different than it would be during a neutral or an El Nino year. So not a guarantee that it's going to be wetter, but certainly a stronger likelihood, and it it raises the possibility, though it's still a low probability, that we could be extraordinarily wet during the winter months. And you can see as you look at the January, February, March, you know, really a continuation of that pattern. So it's pretty strong signal there for us. And here looking at temperature, same kind of thing. There's a slightly increased likelihood that we'd be warmer than normal conditions on average. We are perhaps, what's most evident there is that if you look at December, January, February, at the La Nina on the left side versus the El Nino phase in the kind of orangish red shading, we are very unlikely to have an extremely cold winter. All of our extremely cold winters have occurred during an El Nino winter. So having said that, and looked at those statistics that are specific to Kentucky, we can take a look at the seasonal outlook for December, January, and February. It is very much a La Nina driven forecast or outlook. And for us, it implies an enhanced likelihood of the warmer than normal conditions, with that probability greater to our south, and possibility of colder than normal conditions in the northern plains. So again, we're kind of in between that, but we are more likely to be warmer during the winter months. And precipitation wise, again, based on historical statistics, slightly enhanced likelihood of being wetter than normal during the La Nina period. So it's really interesting how that above normal precipitation pattern kind of comes in down through the Ohio Valley and Midwest to get Kentucky there. So not a guarantee, but that forecast is, or outlook is, you know, important for us going forward, as we'll see here in the next slide. I think it is, maybe the one after that. So the monthly stream flow outlook for December, again, we're likely to be a little bit drier than normal all in all, and stream flows are projected to be in the normal range there going forward. So no major concerns in the near term. But when we look at the seasonal flood outlook for December, January, and February, we have a little bit of orange and red showing up across the state, indicating a greater than 25% chance of either minor or moderate long-range flooding. So that outlook is very, very much driven by the La Nina influence on our seasonal precipitation outlook. Fire danger in normal category for us at this time of year, and likewise for most of the country, with the exception of parts of Texas and Oklahoma. And much better picture than earlier this summer and fall. So summarizing, our statewide average precipitation for November was below normal. We'd had 13 consecutive months of above normal precipitation. Still, soil moisture and groundwater levels, while they're a little bit lower, are either normal or above normal across the state. While the precipitation suggests we're a bit dry, our storage in terms of the soil and such indicates that we're really not at this point. Most streams are running near normal, but again, a seasonal outlook that indicates an elevated risk of flooding. So finally, the key thing there, the La Nina conditions are expected to persist through the winter. While that normally brings above normal precipitation, or typically does, it's not a guarantee. But given the increasing extent of drought on a national scale, we'll be paying close attention on to how that La Nina outlook pans out. Again, it's likely to be drier to the south. That's a very strong signal with the La Nina. And so we may anticipate that there could be more drought development to the south of us. We do know historically that some of our significant droughts over the last several decades, including the drought in 99, 2000, 2007, and I believe 2012, although I have to look it up again. My memory is not as good as it used to be, but those tended to develop following or in the context of a La Nina. Again, not a guarantee. La Nina suggests that we should be wetter, but we just need to pay close attention here through the winter months. So with that, Megan, I'll pass it back to you.
All right, thanks, Stu and Matt, for your contributions. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to either type them into the chat box, or you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. I'll give a minute or so for anyone to respond, and then we'll conclude. All right, there don't appear to be any questions. So thank you so much for participating today. Our next regularly scheduled webinar will be Thursday, January 7th, 2021 at the same time as we've been at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern. If you need to contact anyone, the email addresses are listed here, as well as the follow-up email that will go out later this afternoon. And please remember about the Kentucky Drought and Hydrologic Impact Reporter. As we do go into a more dry period, please consider uploading your conditions in your area. So with that, thank you so much for participating again, and I hope you have a great December.